Yes, it's been a while since I've done one of these, and what's more, the topic for this video was actually meant to be done over a year ago, about a year and a half ago as I recall, and it was going to originally be back when ScreenCritique was the movie nut, to be a follow-up to my film budgeting the basics video that I did as part of the Movie Nut Discusses series, where I talked about how even one scene in a movie can cost an obscene amount of money and how it's often in the little details that a lot of people fail to realize just how much can go into that. And I wanted to create a video as a follow-up to talk about my personal experiences a bit more, because for those of you who don't know or don't bother to check the main page here, I have been making short films for a couple of years now on top of trying to get other projects greenlit, such as Very Strange Things. But I am trained as a screenwriter in both disciplines, in live action and animation. And I also, as part of the courses that I've taken over the years at college and then university, I've worked in just about every capacity on a film shoot. I've done editing, I've done lighting, I've done sound, I've worked as an extra, I've directed, I've produced, I've even done bits of acting. Not the greatest thing ever, but hey, that's what you gotta do sometimes when you're in a pinch. And I wanted to use this as a moment to just share a couple of stories from productions that I've worked on, just to give you an idea for those of you who are not filmmakers, or maybe are just starting out, maybe you're on your first course, or maybe you're messing around with, your dad's camera or something, because I know that I do have quite a few young filmmakers following me and my subscribers, to go over and just give you some words of wisdom and maybe the odd funny story here or there. At least I hope they're funny, because if they're not, this video is going to be really awkward. So the first one I want to talk about comes from 2014, when I was doing my first full producing gig, my first solo producing gig, on a short film entitled Shattered Reflection, which you can see on the Vimeo page that I have, which is linked down below. A little psychological drama about a girl suffering from bulimia and all the problems that she goes through. And I had done little bits of producing beforehand, mainly in the little documentaries I had done back at college, but that was in a very small capacity, and frankly it was not on the scale of this project, which was much larger. That was a very local thing. Here I had to do a lot more in the way of hunting locations, getting actors together, getting equipment, getting crew. Back there it was just mainly me doing all the work. So this was more of a proper producing job than my older things had been. And I knew what I had to do. I had studied on it, and I, of course, knew for the longest time what a producer does. But like so many things in life, you never really understand something until you've done it. And it was not one of the most enjoyable things I've ever done. That's on no one's shoulders or anybody's fault, mind you. I was very blessed to work with a very talented director and writer who had a very strong sense of vision, and she really did carry me through, because with what happened and how often we were plagued with not the best of luck, I did at points feel like giving up, because I was just getting really stressed by it. And a lot of those issues just came down to partly my inexperience and partly just plain old bad luck. Like, one of the big things was we needed a flat to shoot for the main character's home. And I went about looking. We couldn't use either of our places because they didn't look right. So I had to, of course, do a bit of location hunting. So I went up, looked at various housing sites for rentable places, looked at a few things, contacted, didn't get much of a response. Then I got a response from one guy who I think it was in East London, and he said, "Oh yeah, man, I give you a house to use." And it was all cool at first. I emailed him, went over what I wanted, and he didn't seem to have a problem. But then one night we were talking on the phone, and I started to go into the details of what we would need for the film shoot. So I had to specify, we're going to need a particular kind of environment. Do you have any sort of things in the house that might potentially produce noise? Because this was before I was able to go out and see the location. This was still in preliminary talks. Just basically canvassing the area, health and safety and fire exits and all that sort of thing. And one of the strangest things happened where he suddenly realized, despite the emails, despite the amount of times I had told him what my intentions were, that we were doing a film shoot. And then he just started going, no, you're not shooting my house. No. And I just sat there in disbelief with the phone in my hand, just going, is this a joke? Am I just missing something here? Is someone finding this funny? Because I went over with this guy multiple times. I am using your house for filming, and just now he thinks to tell me that he's not comfortable with that. So he refunded the money, and I had to do a last minute, and this was late at night, like this was about midnight going into 1 o'clock, where I had to tell my director what had happened. I had to calm her down, say to her, look, I'm going to do all in my power to get what I can. And of course, I was panicking on my end because I was like, damn, I lost my location. What am I going to do? Where am I going to find something at such short notice? And I was very lucky to find a place up in Aldgate. And the landlord there was a very nice guy. His wife showed us around the premises, very nice people, very understanding. They were even keen on it. And we were just so lucky that we could resolve that. But of course, that wasn't the end of problems on Shared Reflections, because then we had issues with crew where, because people were committed to other projects, because this was a university thing, so everybody was working on everyone's film, we only had certain people for certain days, so we had to find ways to plan around that. And then even at the last minute, we were tripped up because people didn't come on time, or we just didn't have all the contact information that we needed. Again, amateurish oversight on my part. And it just became a really stressful thing. I remember even texting people late at night, like, again, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, going, look, dude, I need you to come down for this many hours on this day. Can you do it? And then after that, we found out that there were sound problems with certain bits of footage. And in particular, a crucial scene that we shot in a bar was just completely unusable. The footage was terrible, the sound was terrible, and we didn't think we really got the angles and the shots we wanted. The director felt she didn't get the kind of mood and atmosphere she wanted. And in part, that was my fault because, again, amateur, I was a little over in my head, and I had got out inferior equipment which just did not meet up to standard, and boy was I kicking myself for the rest of the day after that. I felt just terrible for doing that. But that's one of the things, is when you're in the midst of a production and it's really stressful and you're trying to make sure that everybody does their thing, and you make sure that everyone's got what they need, that the actors have all the little accoutrements, that you got the costumes there, that you've got all the equipment working, that everyone on the crew is there on time, that you've made sure you've got all the location clearances and you came at a good time when you're not going to have to deal with people outside or on another floor of a building you're working on. And in the moment, you just forget about small details because you become very cocky, and, well, a mixture of cocky and nervous, because you're cocky because you feel like you're, such hot stuff because, you're making a movie. But then you realize, oh no, I've got to do this, this, and this by this day or this hour. And you start to trip up, and everybody does it. There isn't a single filmmaker I can think of who hasn't done that. All of the people I knew on the course, all of my friends who are into filmmaking, they've had problems like that. And under that situation, you have to grow a really thick skin and be able to just take a breather and figure out things within a few seconds, because if you don't, everything can go to hell really quickly. For that place, we had to do a complete reshoot of that. It was like a 2-minute sequence, and I had to rehire everyone, and in fact I had to pay the actors to come back, because before it was just purely a, help our student film, get experience, we'll give you details when this is uploaded, and yada yada yada. Now I had to do it because they committed to other productions, so I had to entice them back, so that was at personal cost. And then on top of that, this was when my director had to leave the country for a while to tend to other business. So I had to actually step in and direct the reshoot, and that was a whole nother pain, because there, unlike if I was directing a project of my own creation, here I had to follow what we had done the previous time, and I had to follow the script to the letter, and I had to remember, okay, did we shoot in this position? What was the angle? What was the lighting like? And just making sure that everybody was there, and just everybody could recreate what they had done before and maybe even find a way to do it better. We did a couple of takes for security on each part of the sequence, whether it was the characters talking at the bar and getting their first drinks, or then there was a sequence of the main character coming in through the main door, or the dance sequence. And by the end, I was just exhausted because I was tremendously nervous throughout the whole thing. And I had made a couple of films before this. I wasn't some newbie or some guy who did the catering and just got dragged into this. I had made short films before this, and I was just nervous because I had to recreate someone else's vision, and that was the first time I had really had ever to do that. So main production ends, and it's time to go into post-production. So this is editing, sound mixing, music, color correction, all sorts of other bits and pieces. You might even have to do automatic dialogue replacement, ADR sessions if a piece of audio isn't good. And wouldn't you know it, we had all sorts of problem with the audio. Some of it was recorded at the wrong speeds, the wrong rates, or it was just too quiet, or maybe we didn't have backup sound and we had to use camera sound, which often sounds terrible because it picks up everything. The shotgun mics on cameras by and large are really poor. And we had to go back and try to get the actors to come back in and redub their scene. Most of it was in an opening sequence concerning a therapy session, and we had to get the actresses back to do it. And then even with that, we still had problems because we had issues matching up the footage to the audio because it was playing at different speeds, different rates. So that was a nightmare. That's something that a lot of people who are not tech savvy don't realize, is that film and audio are not only recorded separately for most films, but you have to match the speeds. You can't just press record and that's it. You've got to make sure they match up, otherwise it's going to be a problem. So 24 frames per second or 48 frames will need that certain type of audio to go with it, otherwise it's going to be out of sync and it's just going to look terrible. And we tried really hard. We called in a sound engineer to try and help, didn't do anything. So in the end we just tried our best to remaster camera sound and make it work, and that was just a pain. I felt completely gutted because I had spent 2 or 3 days in the booth with the engineer trying to fix stuff, trying to make sure it matched, and just nothing we could do was working. Every single time we tried to match up the sound, it just sounded like it was in fast forward mode. It was terrible. And this guy was a really experienced person, and he couldn't do anything with it. So we just had to basically swallow our pride and just do the best with what we had. And it's moments like that that really hammer home how often you're told, whether you go to film school or you just learn this on your own through books, or maybe you just gung-ho it with your camera, the importance of planning ahead, of really having everything ready, of being able to have something in reserve if something goes wrong. Because it is not even funny how many things can go wrong on a film set. Equipment can fail, or equipment can be of a much lower standard than you expected, or you can have pieces missing because the person who was in charge of storage didn't look after it. Or you can have actors who are late, or actors who are difficult, or have crew members who are late or are difficult. You can have massive problems with the teamwork. You can have difficulties hiring out locations. And again, sometimes you'll encounter people who just don't know what they're doing, like the flat gentleman I was talking about, and just have everything ruined at a glance, because we were ready to go and that guy just completely messed everything up. In the end, we got the film done, and it was actually well received when we had the big end of year screening, so that was at least something. And I just take away from that experience just how much of a headache it can be to really try and bring things together when that's not your area of focus. My area of focus is more director and screenwriter, and even bits of editing. Producing is not really my thing, so I was way out of my depth. But at the time, I was just looking for another challenge, and in this case, the challenge kind of beat me. Then the following year, and this is more to do with writing, I had a classmate who was actually a crew member on Shared Reflection come up to me and say on Facebook that she was having problems because the script for her short film was just falling apart. She had been trying to work with another writer to get it together. It was going to be for a thriller, and it just wasn't working. It was a total mess. The writer she was working with wasn't good people, to put it mildly. They were only a few months away from having to shoot, and they were already behind on where they would have wanted to be because of script problems. So I said, well, look, let me take a look at this. Let me see what I can bring to this. and see if maybe I can recommend some things, maybe a few touches up, because I thought, okay, maybe it's just a case of some stuff is like over budget. Remember, these are short films. These are things where you have only a few £100 tops to make them, if that. So you have to figure out how to be resourceful with what you have and how to make the best of your resources, and in particular your time. Because believe me, you might think that, 6-7 months is enough time. It is not. It is not funny how much time you need for filming, how much time you need for post-production. Post-production time, it is almost hysterical how many newbies to filmmaking completely undervalue the production process. And even more so post-production. Post-production is probably the most critical area of film production, because even if you shoot something with a really great script and great actors and you direct it well, if it does not look good when put into editing, when you have to add music and sharpen up sound and maybe do touch-ups to the image and maybe throw in special effects if you're doing that, it can just come out looking like total rubbish, and it can just be an absolute headache. So I thought, okay, maybe this just needs a few tweaks. So I looked at it and wow, it was a complete and utter train wreck. It was tonally all over the map. It was a complete mess of ideas. It was this thriller about a lesbian clown who got impregnated by like her best friend's fiance who was cheating on her. And there was this whole weird thing about a nightclub, and she was like taking drugs. And I am not making any of this up. I swear to you, this is what was in this convoluted mess of a script that, we only have about 12 minutes to tell our story. It's a 12-minute short film. This damn thing was like 30, 40 pages. It was ridiculous. It was all over the map, and there were sequences in it. There were like these hallucination sequences, and like, I think there was even like a chase scene and stuff that you just can't do with a few £100 on a very tight budget in a very tight time frame. I just looked at this and I thought, how did you even think this would work? Like, really, how could you look at this and think that this was going to go any other way than a total disaster? So I straight up told him my thoughts, and I said, look, you really need to rethink this. I'm not feeling this at all. This is not doable on the budget. So I agreed to help out. We completely overhauled the setup. We went away from lesbian, clown, psychopath thing, whatever it was meant to be. And we instead crafted a much simpler story about two lawyers, and one of them is, well, I don't want to give the twist away, but one of them is hiding a few dark things. Very simple, very straightforward, allowed for a lot of character stuff and for actors to just sink their teeth into the material. So we quickly came up with that idea, and then I would go away and pump out a draft in maybe 1 or 2 nights, and then she would look at it, say, I like this, I don't like this, and then send it back, and then we would send it to the course tutor, who was for all intents and purposes the executive producer, and see what he thought, and he would come back with his notes, and I would have to try my best to balance everything with my own vision, because, if I'm writing it, I would like to have a sense of some control and some say in what happens, because every experience is a new challenge, and I had never really tried to write straight drama before. I had done more in the way of comedy and things, so this was just a new challenge for me. And for the most part, it was a very easygoing relationship. People were very supportive and patient. There were a few hiccups here and there, mostly down to the director sometimes being a little too eager and ambitious. There was, at one point, one of her notes for, I think it was the 3rd or the 4th draft, and she wanted the ending to involve a car on fire. And I just sat there looking at the screen going, excuse me? You want to have a car on fire on a student budget? And bear in mind, this is on top of having to rent out another flat as well, and a high-end one, because it's meant to belong to a lawyer. Where do you think you're going to get the money for that? And hell, where do you think you're going to get the people to work on that? We don't know any stuntmen or any special effects technicians, and nobody is going to, like that, who would be able to do that, is going to come and work on some little student film. Not saying she was always wrong. She did have a lot of legitimate points, and she encouraged me to just keep pushing myself and find ways to get around various issues concerning resources and the fact that we only had a very small amount of time to make this in, and she had to, send it over to a producer to try and get what they needed and to start looking for flats to use. and to start getting crew together. And it was just a question of making something that was engaging and exciting, but also doable. Also something that could be made at very short notice, that didn't have a ton of bells and whistles on it, that could be done. Because one of the things I said to her was, sometimes smaller is better. I get that this is your last film here, and you want to do something that's going to really show off your skills, but sometimes smaller is better. Just look at, films like 12 Angry Men or Roman Polanski's Carnage, where there's not tons of, action or effects work or a lot of locations. Everything is very constrained. And yet they are able to craft really engaging stories out of that. And so my challenge was just to find a way to balance everything. But in the end, it came out and it looked pretty damn good, honestly. So sometimes you can just surprise yourself with how you can go through hell, you can go through these very difficult times, and yet craft something that is actually fairly worthwhile or has some merits in it. And well, in future, if I ever think of more funny little stories or things I'd like to share with you guys and give you an insight into the world of the micro-budget filmmaker, I'll be sure to do that. And hey, if for nothing else, at least stuff like this gives me a means of responding to smart Alex out there who love to say on my reviews, "Well, what do you know about making a movie?"